This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation.
Hello, everyone. This is Gerard Robinson. I am the Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation, located in beautiful Charlottesville, Virginia. And I'm also a fellow of practice at the Institute for Advanced Studies at the University of Virginia. As you know, as you have watched us before, I have an opportunity to get together with educators, leaders, social entrepreneurs, professors, and others across the country to have conversations about education through the lens of culture. And tonight is no different. So we're going to talk to people who know a lot more about arts education or education in the arts than most of us. But it's actually a subject that we don't spend a great deal of time focused on for a host of reasons. And so rather than me give you the reasons, we've assembled people today, of course, with Catherine's assistance, to make sure that we have a good conversation about the topic. Right now, it's we're getting ready to go into the holiday season, but right now it's November. And when you look out, people are getting ready for the holiday, they're getting ready for Thanksgiving. And school, for some, may come to a short close, and for others, it's not. But at no part during a student's education, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, is arts not a part of it. Not only what takes place during the school day, but also after school. And so with that, I want to welcome all of you to our session of In Culture. And what I'd like to do, and I'll just start first with Sia. I will start with you, and then we'll just do a round robin. Just tell me your name, school where you're located if you want to, and then you can answer one question. What attracted you to the field of education?
Okay. So my name is Kyriakakos. I teach in Baltimore City Public Schools in the largest high school, which is Mergenthal Vocational Tech. We're a tech school. I just got my 10-year certificate from the district, and I think I'm going to take my Teacher of the Year certificate down and put that up because it's been quite the feat to be here for 10 years. And what brought me into the classroom, I have to say, is teaching kids that were at risk. I didn't think ever that I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be an artist, and to boot, a famous one. And that was my goal in life, and I was doing pretty good. And I was fortunate enough to have a friend who was very persistent in bugging me to go and help her teach at-risk kids in a very weird little neighborhood in Connecticut. And it was a time without phones. And so she got sick, so I stepped in to help her out, and I totally fell in love with the interaction and those quiet spaces when people are just making together, and especially young people. And that it was a Saturday, it was a fall morning, it was crispy and a little wet. And that Monday, after I had packed up my stuff from teaching with those kids, I went and signed up to get certified to be a teacher. And here I am about good 30 years later.
30 years later. I'm familiar with your high school, doing a research project on after-school programs. Whenever we hear about Baltimore, it's always the negative stuff, always. And there's some good things going on. So look forward to you telling us about the role you're playing there. And this is your 30th year in teaching?
No, not on and off. So it's 30 years after that moment with those kids in Connecticut. But I went and got certified, and then I taught for 5-6 years in Connecticut. Went for my master's, went to Greece, became famous. And then I realized my place was in the classroom, left all that, and came back to Baltimore. It was pretty awesome. So I had a choice at that point.
Good for you. We look forward to hearing more. Brian, same question for you. Who's Brian? Where you work? And what was your aha? I want to become an educator.
So Dr. Brian McDaniel from Rancho Mirage High School in California. I'm the 2018 California Teacher of the Year and the 2019 Global Teacher Prize finalist. My aha moment happened to be great teachers. I had a really troubled childhood where there was violence and foster care and all sorts of things that didn't make sense as a child. And as I grew older, I saw it still not make sense. So I wanted to do something about it. And so I made sure that every child who comes in my classroom, whether they have money or not, they have an instrument. Whether they can play or not, it's a good thing. I'm a teacher. I can teach a kid how to play anything. So we'll take you on day one. If we were going to come to the football game, you're more than welcome. If you find your way to California, I'd love to teach you something. And so we really build off of a concept called the regiment. Every kid belongs. We sometimes fall. When I say we, it's I. I had a kid that I really tried to put into the band, and I tried from piccolo to tuba to snare. I couldn't get him to play anything. And I started thinking, I'm doing this wrong. I need to see what his skill set is. Turns out he's really good at wiring mics, setting stands, and all that. After graduation, he has a job as a stagehand in Portland, Oregon. So it's really building up our kids based off of their talents and making sure everyone has a place, everyone has a home.
Yeah, so two things. Number one, thank you for opening up your personal story with us. We appreciate that. I'm from Los Angeles. For those who are not familiar with California and how large it is, are you southern, middle, or central, I should say, or northern?
I'm southern. So from LA, I'm 2 hours directly east. We're neighbors off the 10, if you want to call it that. I studied in Long Beach. I actually teach at Cal State San Bernardino, which is also off the 10. And for, I want to say Brandon University, but we just got bought. So we're UMass Global.
Oh, okay. Look forward to hearing more. Jonathan, same question for you.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Jovich. I am the 2018 Ohio Teacher of the Year and an elementary art educator at Olentangy Local Schools, which is north of Columbus, Ohio, at a great school called Liberty Tree Elementary School. And this is my 17th year teaching kindergarten through 5th grade. And for me, I actually grew up with two parents who are artists. And I had the most joy-filled, adventurous childhood. And it was wild and wonderful. And yet they're also graphic designers, so aesthetically pleasing. And yet I realized that through those conversations and through those experiences, my parents were also helping me identify my feelings and talk about my experiences. And I wanted to provide that for other kids. I didn't really want to do the jobs that they had as artists and as designers. I wanted to work with people and to spark conversations with small humans. And I get the pleasure of doing that every day.
Stuff. My wife's family's from Ripley, Ohio. So we always like we hear Ohio stories. We kick it over to James. Same question.
Good evening, everyone. My name is James Young, and I am a music teacher in Ferguson, Missouri. My story is kind of like Sia. I didn't want to be a music teacher in the beginning. I was in the Army for 3 years, got out, and ended up at my grandmother's house. And she was a retired music educator, and so I just wanted to go back to school for music. And she was like, "Well, why don't you try education as your plan B?" And so, but I got in there, got into the program, and just really fell in love with teaching and what I could do for students. By the way, my great-grandmother, who I also knew, kind of called it out of me at a younger age. She said, "You know, you have the patience for a teacher." And at the end, I was like, "No, not me." But it called me. And so this is my 15th year teaching, and I am 2022 Missouri State Teacher of the Year.
For all the obvious reasons, when we hear Ferguson, stories, of course, come to mind, what happened. Like Jonathan as well, you are a music teacher. Any particular instrument or instruments, or are you a combination of that in theory?
So my instrument is guitar, so I'm kind of an oddball, but I also sing. So I teach vocal music. I actually teach musical theater, co-teach musical theater with a theater teacher, and I also teach classical guitar.
All right. I look forward to hearing more from you. Sheena, same question. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you also. I teach in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I teach high school choral and drama. And this is actually my 39th year. In March, it would actually turn to 40. I am Connecticut's 2019 Teacher of the Year. And I think my aha moment was in college, where I was assigned to work with some students in an alternative school. And I saw the difference it made in their lives. And I reflected on what had actually gotten me to that point. And it had been a couple of really phenomenal teachers. And that's when I thought, you know what, this could be for me. And I thought I could handle, pass that on to someone else, pay it forward, so to speak. And I've been hooked ever since.
So 40 years, we of course know you started teaching when you were 10. So we're glad to still see you in the profession.
I wish.
Phil, good to see you again. Same question for you.
Good to see all of you, and thank you so much. As was stated, I'm Phil Wilson from the good old state of Alabama. I'm the 2010 Alabama State Teacher of the Year. As you can tell by the Southern drawl, much different from the rest of you. I grew up in a musical household. We sang at church choir, and I had teachers who sang things all of the time. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. I like this. I had piano teachers to start with me and quit with me. And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure if that's a good positive symbol, but I'll keep going anyway. When I was in high school, I had a band director who was mean as a snake. And she snatched me up and she pulled me together. She said, you're going to do something with your life, and it is going to be music. And I'm like, oh, when she looks at you like that, you're like, oh, okay. And so she told me about her alma mater. She took me to her alma mater, and I fell in love. And then when I got there and I started learning how to be a teacher, I fell in love with the art of being a teacher. I was the first of my brothers to graduate from high school and go on to college, to be a college graduate, to receive a doctorate degree as of last year. Just thankful and happy to share that experience with my students, to let them know that you don't have to be a statistic. You don't have to be a number. You can be whatever it is that you would like to be, should you put your mind to it.
So you're moving students from a statistic to a note. Absolutely. And you're also not the only one, at least thus far, with a Southern accent. I grew up in California, and people hear my Southern accent and they say, well, how do you have a Southern accent from California? I said, I'm from Southern California. So you still have that part in there as well.
There's a difference, right?
There's a difference. Pilar, good to see you. Am I saying
Pilar.
Pilar, sorry, Pilar.
Yes, Pilar Biller from Reno, Nevada. I teach at Damani Ranch High School, and this is my 22nd year of teaching. And I haven't always taught high school. I've taught elementary and middle, and so I just kind of bounce around. But I did not plan on being a teacher. I went to Gonzaga University and graduated with a BA in art, and did not know what I was going to do from that point. And so I went back to school and I took 3 classes. I took anthropology, I took museology, and I took education. And the one that spoke to me the most was education. And I got really excited about it. I said, I think this is something I'd be really good at. And so that's the direction I took.
Are you a native of Nevada?
I was born in Idaho, but I have lived in Nevada since I was in 2nd grade.
Okay, so it is home.
It's home.
And I double majored in anthropology. You can imagine, coming from a working class household, what I majored in anthropology and philosophy. My parents had no idea what the heck I was going to do with my life.
Right.
But it's always good to hear someone who studied anthropology. Chris, who's Chris?
Hey, everybody. So I'm Chris Gleason. I'm from Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. I teach at Patrick Marsh Middle School. I teach middle school band, and the 2017 Wisconsin Teacher of the Year, and just thankful to be here in the presence of all these amazing people. My story is my father was my band director, and I grew up in his room. And day after day, I just watched him pour himself into it and see him work with a student. And after like 45 minutes, he'd tap him on the shoulder and he'd say, good, now come back tomorrow, we'll do it again. And, that just stuck with me, that work ethic, but also that love of changing lives. And I just work every day to try to get somewhere close to that.
How far are you from Milwaukee?
About an hour. So we're right outside Madison.
Okay, outside Madison. Yeah, I was actually in Waukesha a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
All right. Erin, coming to you.
Hello, it's nice to be with you this evening. My name is Erin Spanogle. I am the 2014 West Virginia Teacher of the Year. I teach art grades 3 through 5 at Tomahawk Intermediate School in Berkeley County, West Virginia. I have taught for 19 years, but I have to admit, I feel like the odd duck here because the first 17 years of that was in grades 3 through 5 in a general ed classroom. And I've recently changed over to teaching art. So it's kind of like being a new teacher again, just with a lot more experience. But what drew me to education, I had no plans of becoming a teacher. I had an aunt who taught first grade for 37 years that I was very inspired by and knew that she had been a big part of many of her students' stories and a lot of people's lives. But I initially went to school majoring in communications and journalism. I always felt that something wasn't quite right, though. And I was at that time also in college, that first couple years or so, a volunteer in my local school district. It's called the PASS program, where you're matched with students in the local schools, where you're a mentor for 30 minutes a week. And I started to realize it wasn't so much that I wanted to tell people stories as a journalist, but that I wanted to be a part of their stories as they grew up as well. So I changed my major to elementary education, and that's where I've been.
It's always good to meet someone from West Virginia. My father was born in Charleston, West Virginia.
Okay.
And we grew up in Los Angeles, and he would tell people that he was born in the big city. I said, well, in West Virginia, yes, not Los Angeles, different context, but I'm glad to see you here. And my aunt was a teacher in Charleston Public Schools for about 30 years.
Oh,
First in
wow.
her family to go to school. So good to have you on the call. Last but not least, we're going to go to Toney.
Greetings to everyone. I am Toney L McNair Jr., and I am the 2017 Virginia Teacher of the Year. I'm super excited to be here this evening. First, thank you, Catherine, and to see my sister and brother, Chris and Sia. Just love those two right there. Like Sia, I did not want to teach music. And it stems from this. I grew up in the Black church. And in the Black church, you are in the choir, either in the choir or on the usher board. If you have talent, you're in the choir. And because my mother taught my siblings and I to sing, we were always singing. And so when it came time for me to graduate from high school and go to college, everyone was telling me, you're going to college to study music. And I went to Norfolk State University, one of the finest music programs anywhere. And so how I became an educator, I was actually working as an assistant director for minority affairs at Eastern Virginia Medical School. And it was a grant program, and that program ended. And I was called out of the blue to sub. And I don't know how they got my name in Chesapeake, Virginia, but I went there to the high school, Indian River High School. My son had attended that high school, and so I knew the principal. And within about 20 minutes, he said, "Do you want the job?" And I said, "Sure." And when I walked into the classroom, I realized that I was in the right place at the right time. Not only to teach music, I believe that we're all on assignments, and we have an assignment. We are in the place that we are in for a particular reason, and our students need us, and we are more than what our positions say we are. And I'll stop there because my journey in the classroom led me to do a number of different things in addition to teaching my students the love of music.
And Toney, I'm also going to assume that not only did people say that you were going to teach music, but that you were going to preach as well. I'm assuming you heard that too.
Well, sir, I have a Master of Divinity and a Doctorate of Ministry degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I am on the pastoral staff at the church where I serve.
Okay. When you first started off, I said, I hear something.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't want it.
You got Phil starting to shake too. Uh-huh. And James too. Spears gonna move here in a minute. But this is why we have conversations like this, because your students and your parents, in fact, some of your peers, may have no idea that some of you said, guess what? I never thought I'd become a school teacher. Or if I did, the path that you took or the paths that you took to arrive to the place where you are right now. When I was teaching fifth grade, I one day bumped into a student at a grocery store, and she looked at me very strangely. What are you doing here? I said, I actually have a life outside of the classroom. And she just looked. And she was like, oh, you have a life. Yes. And so when they hear your stories, some of them may not know some of the nuances. Sia, let's start off with you. You mentioned Greece. You traveled. You said you became famous in some place.
I am Greek by descent, if you can't tell by my last name.
Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to make any assumptions, but yes, with all the
I appreciate that.
Yes.
Both my parents were Greek economic immigrants to the United States, and when I was 6, they packed us up. It's the dream of every immigrant to return home. They packed us up and took us to Greece. So, although my first 6 years were like, basically I grew up in downtown Baltimore on top of the diner that they ran, right in the middle of somewhere between the ghetto of Baltimore and Johns Hopkins Hospital, 2 different worlds. Then we were in Greece for 10 years. So that also shaped me. And so I exist within a schism between being American and being Greek, or maybe that's what made me an artist after all, being split between 2 countries. But being a global citizen, right, and having the opportunity to return to Greece with a Fulbright when I was 30 opened up the world to me. And it allowed me to travel. Greece became just the place where I put down my suitcase. And I was able to go to 27 different countries and make art, teach art, collaborate, and find myself and understand human nature, basically through art. And then I represented Greece at the Venice Biennial in 2003, within 3 years of that Fulbright. And it was amazing. And it was devastating at the same time, because I realized that although in the art world, I had something to share through my work, I didn't belong to those kind of people. And because the art lost its purity, and it became about fame, and it became about money. And that's not why I was making art. Because for me, art has something like, and forgive me, Dr. Toney, I love you. It almost is like a religion to me. There's something very pure about it and divine, right? And so if you are in it, and when you're making it, and when you're living it, it is magical. And when I was making my work in Venice, and I realized that other people were not in it for those same reasons, and returned home, because in the classroom, I could be there with my kids at this very quiet space where we were sharing something very precious together.
Thank you. So based on something you just said, this is really a group question. I've got another question, but I want to pivot early. So all of you are in the arts, whether it's instrument, whether it's theater, whether it's voice, or other. You're in one of the few disciplines within pre-K-12 education where you could actually reach across time and space and find inspiration. We can't say that per se about economics or other fields. Yes, important people, but you're in something where you can feel and touch across space and time. In times that we're in right now where we need a lot of inspiration and encouragement, where we could decide not to be, who do you go to, listen to, close your eyes and hear, or look at sculpture? Who do you go to for your inspiration in times like this? It's open to anyone. You can jump in as you like.
I think for me this year with my students, in order to feel inspired, I had to go back to something in time that inspired me as a child. So this year in my classroom, we actually started out with The Wizard of Oz and then brought it up to The Wiz. And it was easier to deal with someone else's journey than to deal with our own initially because we were just coming out of the pandemic. And so by studying the journeys of those people, we were really examining ourselves. And so where we are right now is we're on our own journey. And so I think my inspiration had to come from the things that gave me fancy in the play to as a child, because without necessarily saying it to my students, I still needed to escape right now. This has been the toughest year of my career. And so by going to something that brought pleasure then and allowed me that room to imagine and be a child again, I was able to then offer them that same opportunity. So I think for me, it was going back in time to my own childhood to help them find theirs.
Thank you.
Likewise, I'm jumping in if it's okay.
Oh, go right ahead.
I've been using music as a time machine to really dive into where my kids are coming from. I teach in a very Hispanic population. And if you Google marching band in Lechona, you're going to find my band. It was amazing when we first played it and seeing the reaction from a lot of our non-English speaking parents. They automatically related and it allowed them to dig deep. And so when we went to Zoom, like everybody, ensemble kind of became out of the question. So we started looking at music ethnographies and really, imagining what it'd be like walking the streets of Vienna in the 1800s and listening to this great music. And the kids were able to really dive into it and get an interest. And that's kind of what I live for, is seeing those fires and those eyes light up when, they want to listen to Chopin, and it's the best.
I do have a thought too, and this will sound incredibly cheesy, but like whenever my students ask me who my favorite artist is, I'm always like, it's you, right? But there is something to be said about the fact that I am continually inspired by the humans that I'm working with in this room. And in a heartbreaking way this year, I've learned specifically that like for so many of our kids, they just want to be here. And they're so enthusiastic just to be here. And yes, there's so many challenges. Yes, there are so many challenges. But also the fact that so many of these students just want to connect with us, just want to, like, the enthusiasm I have, they're having, it's this give and take that for me, it's about trying to be as present as humanly possible to then, feed that back to them in hopes that, they continue to just desire to be in this room with me creating.
And not cheesy at all. The cheesy thing is not to say it.
Right. I know. I was wondering if I should.
Glad you did.
I agree with Jonathan that being with the kids and just seeing what they come up with and what they want to create and their ideas, that is the greatest joy and has, given me a lot of hope during this past school year. Because there's a lot of heavy and a lot of trauma that has happened to these kids. And the fact that they just want to make things and they're happy and they're focused on what they're doing and what they're creating for that short period of time that they're in your class, that gives you a lot of inspiration, and it gives you a lot of will to keep going on and keep creating things. And I truly believe that the arts and arts education is what's going to sustain kids through this pandemic and post-pandemic time period, when we're getting back on our feet and dealing with the quote unquote learning loss that we hear in the general ed classroom, giving kids the space within the arts to create and to just be without the constructs of data.
Thank you.
I would agree with everything that's been said, and I'll add to that for me, this last couple of years has just been creatively draining. And I say that because this is an area that we've never had to deal with. You know, kids have always come into my classroom and there's always been an instrument there. There's always been a voice there to be heard. There's always something to touch. In the last year and a half, they say, oh, you can't sing it, you can't touch that, you can't do this. And so for me, it's like, okay, after 21 years, I'm having to reimagine every single bit of what I know. It's, starting from square one, like there is no one to start with. I mean, you're having to just recreate the whole world in that sense. So for me, going back to with my friends, my musical friends, finding out, say, what worked for you? What did you do now that you will keep after the pandemic? For me, that was a great sustainer. So going back to that, that inspired me to say, you know what, maybe my creativity is not dead. Maybe it's just a little bit of sleep. It's had some melatonin. Now it's time to give it some coffee and wake it up. But just being with my friends, my musical friends, having some Zoom meetings and, some outside meet and greets. I had dinner with one of my best friends. I sat in my car. His family sat in their front yard. This was when the height of COVID first happened. And I mean, we did some singing, we did some talking, and it was fantastic. It was new, but it was fantastic. So going back to those friends is what kind of helped me out throughout the pandemic.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tony. You win. Go.
No, Chris. Thanks. I think understanding that through this process, music and the arts help us to get in touch with our emotions. Is still essential. And using these mediums as a platform to be expressive, and with that, as Phil said, being creative and even innovative as to how we express ourselves. Then on the flip side of that, my role now, I assist educators with taking care of themselves. In other words, my current role is an advocate and an organizer. And so it's important to me that the educator who stands in front of the students have a sense of purpose and do not feel like they are alone in the midst of this pandemic, that someone is listening. And I think those kinds of things is what we major in. We major in listening to our students. It's important not only to listen to their notes or to listen as they put their art on the wall or on the canvas. We're listening to what they're not saying. And that's essential as an artist. I see you going through the motions, but what aren't you saying? And so that expands our role as musicians, as artists, to be there for our students, but also be there for one another.
I don't think I want to follow that, but I'm going to try. Here's the thing. I found the pandemic to be very easy. This is so simple to teach during this time. I'm just kidding. Completely. Yeah, that's not real. But here's the thing. What I've realized is that the why never changed. My why never changed. It was the how, right? And that was the ultimate hoop for all of us to jump through. I mean, but it's the why was still there. And I just had to pull back the curtain a little bit and just notice that, oh, I'm still teaching kids, right? And I'm still trying to get them excited and ignite their fire and get them to love learning and to be good human beings, and to do that through music. And, the benefit that I found too is that the arts tend to slow things down. And I think everyone slowed down a little bit, which was okay. I mean, things go fast. And the thing I love about art and music is that we can slow things down for a little while and just take a moment to appreciate, to spectate, to ponder, to speculate, to consider what might be and what might not be. But that's powerful. And I think we got to keep that in our lives.
Pilar, James?
Well, I think for me, it came as a surprise. I somehow was invited to join a happy hour art teacher support group early on. And I thought, okay, well, we'll check this out and see who these people are. And we ended up meeting every week, every Friday through that spring and then through all of last year. And there were the art teachers from across, the country. And there were just a few of us, maybe 5 or 10 would show up each time, but we were able to share our resources, our ideas. And so being able to do that, being able to share my knowledge with them was really empowering, but also to get their great ideas and be able to incorporate them and ask questions and be excited about the ways that teachers and these visual arts teachers were innovating. And so that, to me, being able to meet new people, bring new people into my life, but also have that support, which I just find that community so important. And that's really what got me through.
Well, James.
Wow. So somebody said this earlier. I keep hearing the word connection come up. And I think that is so much of the reason of why we do what we do is connection. And I think arts in particular is so good for students because it's one of the few places where I emphasize that we have to rely on each other as a team. Like you can't do arts by yourself. And so in this age where connection is such a big deal, I've been inspired by my students too. And what's interesting, I teach middle school. I teach at a 6th grade center. And they don't want to admit that they need it, but they do. They're so stuck in the middle. And so they have subtle ways of showing that appreciation, that they appreciate you, they appreciate each other. And that's inspiring. So kind of like Chris said, the why hasn't changed. It's just the how. So continuing to make those connections and seeing that still can happen. It might be a little bit harder. It's a little more difficult and more layers to it now. But that is inspiring. And that's a reason to keep teaching, I would say.
A lot of good themes that all of you share. Erin talked about data, which is a good tipping point to the next question. When people hear arts education or the arts, a lot of things come to mind. And one of them, rightly or wrongly, they'll say, oh, those are the feel-good. That's a feel-good work. It's not really academic. There's no connection between the arts and higher thinking skills or higher order evaluations. That's not the case, but people just feel that way. Why do you think people still feel that way in 2021? Because we don't say that about college students. And what are we missing as a public as relates to the work you're doing? And as before, just jump in as you like.
I got a really great compliment yesterday by one of my students who wanted to just leave my classroom. And he's like, man, I took this class thinking that it would be like elementary school, we'd be painting, it'd be fun. And this ends up being like so much work. And Miss K just wants us to just make stuff and actually understand things and how they work. We started with circles and lines, and now it became anatomy. She wants us to learn things. This is a lot of work. And he wanted to drop my class. And it's that lack of standard, perhaps, that at some point happens, or the fact that the last time my students had art was in elementary school. And very often in American public schools, especially inner cities, there is not a cohesive K through 12 arts education program. And kids like my students, I know because I do collect that data, which is like, when was the last time you had an art class? Was it in school, out of school? Was it music? Was it dance? Was it in the choir in your church? When was something that you did that was creative? And very often last time was elementary. So they remember those happy times in elementary school where you're splatter painting and you're expressing yourself, and they haven't made that leap, which become conceptual, theoretical, anthropological, sociological, and they haven't brought it into high school and then later into college. And the second part of all of that is, of course, in America, it's extremely difficult to make it as an artist. So when you look at which professions in America make the least amount of money, anthropology number one, arts number two, right? We're in the A's right there. And that also keeps people from taking our profession seriously as an actual practice sometimes. I'm talking about visual artists, so.
That's actually a really good point, because when people think about artists, at least you have a paintbrush. When they think of anthropology, they see me using my fingers on a wall and holding rocks. Others want to join.
I'd say.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go.
I think part of it too is that the people in power in my situation don't have a relationship with the arts themselves. So if they don't see it as a valuable tool for students or as an academic course, they'll say, we want this to be high-level academic courses. Day one, you need to have something academic going on in your classroom. And yet they'll give you a classroom of 30 students in advanced choir, 5 of whom have ever sung in the last 4 to 5 years. And everybody else is misplaced. They're either an visual arts student. I had AP students for other classes. And so if the people in power don't value it, then the students don't either, and they won't see it as being a valuable academic course. And the other thing is the scheduling. So with us in our high school right now, every course is half year. So if you really want to build an academic environment, students have to be able to travel a pathway for us to get them from where they are to where they need to be, especially because I'm inner city, for them to be able to compete with all the other students that they're going to be next to. Well, that can't be done in half-year courses when you can only have them for one half-year course. And this year, we also have quarter classes. So the students I had in August, end of August, as of this past week, are gone. And I have a brand new group, and this is high school. So if the people that make the decisions and that have the power don't see the value other than talk, don't actually see and have that experience themselves and have that understanding of what we are capable of doing, I think that's part of the issue.
Can I piggyback a little bit on what Sheena is saying? Also, No Child Left Behind left a lot of children behind because they really valued like reading and writing and arithmetic rightfully so, everybody should know how to read and write and count. And they sacrificed everything that brought the kids to a school and for that. And that nobody comes to school to take a math test, but everybody comes to school for the art show or the music show or the Christmas show. Everybody comes to school to be in bands. They're not coming to school to take calculus necessarily. Some do, but or you know, and that's a problem. And I teach the credit requirement for graduation. There is no track for my students to have a career in art. They have art once with me in high school, and it's usually too late at that point. Is there in 11th or 12th grade? I can't build a portfolio of 12 to 20 pieces to get them in anywhere.
To also go along with what Sheena was saying about why those relationships are so important, you know, with this data overdriven era in education, we risk repelling kids about learning, or just repelling them about the whole education process. You know, if they don't want to learn, they don't want to be there, they're not going to want to continue their education, whether it's a trade or whether it's college. And with all that has happened in this past year, the stress and the trauma, the arts are healing, and the arts are a way for kids to use a part of their brain that they otherwise wouldn't be using if they were just sitting at the desk doing test prep or doing reading exercises or math algorithms. The arts are an essential part of getting those students back on track and raising test scores and looking at the data in a way that encompasses everyone, not just the general education classroom.
Jumping in there, I think that the focus that we're looking at with data is not, accurate. If we look and see our behaviors, I bet you all of our classes have great behaviors. We're not getting kids suspended. They're at class. Their attendance is great. We bring kids to school, and it has to do with focus. If you look at the core classes, all the kids are competing against each other, trying to be better than the best, top of the class. And in a band or in an art room, no one's better than anybody else. Everybody's working towards the greater good. And that's where you build your community. That's how you get everything to make more sense. And I mean, if you look at the real world, unless you're in the Squid Games fighting for number one, this isn't a reality. We all need to work together. We all need to hear each other and listen. And our programs are what gives those kids those opportunities to grow. We talked a little bit about divinity going, and to me, music is the highest form of communication. It's how I talk to God. And I want my kids to have that communication, even though I don't work in a school where I can openly say that and say, this is what my purpose is. This is what my calling is. That's what drives me, to make sure that my kids feel love through sound.
I'm enjoying this conversation because it reminds me of something that I used to say to not only my students, but to the parents. In my classroom, students are engaged in all of the subjects in one classroom setting. So there's history, there's math, there is science, there's art, just all of the subjects in my class. And I would get excited about that and sharing that with them because I had colleagues in the building who wanted to discount music and wanted to discount art and say that their classes were more important. And I would say all of our classes are important, but my class is unique because I cover all of the spectrums. You even learn a foreign language in my class. Choral. I was choral conductor for middle school, and so you learn how to be creative. And I used to tease my students and say to them, if I ever wanted to teach, because I didn't want to teach, it would have been English, because in high school English was my favorite subject. So yes, you will write in my class too, and I will use my pen. And I would check syntax and all of that kind of thing. And they would say, like Sia was saying earlier, but this is a music class. This is so much work. But you have to be well-rounded when you go outside of my class into the real world. So, and I would also share with them that when I worked at the medical school, those students who tended to be received or admitted into medical school all participated in some type of art, whether it was music or art, period. And so, you know, we often are put in a position where we have to do a lot of advocating for what we do, because as Sheena said, it has been discounted, and we're only important when it makes the school look good. But what is it doing for the student? The student comes to school to be in our classes, period.
I want to go back to what you said at the beginning as well, when you brought up the fact that that in our rooms, it's about feelings, right? And part of it is, yes, it is. Just as Erin shared, it is. It's an expression of who our students are as individuals. But if that communication isn't happening beyond this room, then there's never going to be the learning that's going to change the trajectory of how we are viewed as content areas. All the time I will have parents say, oh, this isn't like what I did in second grade. And I'd be like, right, it's not. Your expectation that I'm going to be making paper bag puppets, is not necessarily what's happening in here. And if we're going to do paper bag puppets, they're going to be the best paper bag puppets you've ever seen. So I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have to change narratives. We have to inform. Yes, we have to advocate. And we have to communicate with first our students, then with their parents, then with the broader community about what's actually going on within our rooms is different than what many people, I believe, expect. Higher order thinking is happening all the time. Expression of emotion is happening all the time. And that starts with my youngest students in kindergarten all the time.
You know, I think society as a whole has been the downfall, in my opinion, of the arts. I have to remind myself constantly that I am a teacher first, and music happens to be the vehicle by which I'm teaching. Teacher first, music happens to be the vehicle by which I'm teaching. So when we look at that and put it in the perspective of society, since I've been teaching since 2001, the popularity, I'll say, or the polarization of teachers has been very heavy, has gone down. Why? Not because they're looking at what's going on inside of the classroom. They're looking at numbers and data, as Erin said earlier, that's coming out of the classroom. But as we know, that doesn't really tell the whole picture. And someone please show me on the data charts where the arts fit into that data and how we fit into the big overall growth of who the child really is. If you can find that data that is reported to the US Department of Education, that's reported to any entity, please send that data to me and let me help to look at it. I think that society has just looked at teachers, they've beat us down for the last few years. And because of that, I believe that we as arts teachers have been looped into just being the whole negative part of it. Two quick stories. I had a teacher who said to me, I asked students to bring pencils to my class, as you did. I had a classroom teacher who had worked with me almost since day one, said, why do they need pencils in music? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Do you not think that we have to create music? Second thing is everything education-wise, every education buzzword, in my opinion, what is it saying? Everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten. I will revise that. Everything I need to know I learned in an arts class. Differentiation Have you been in a middle school band room? You've got 30 odd instruments and 50,000 kids who don't know how to pick up the case and how to touch it. Yet by the end of the week, everybody can play a note. Everybody can hold the instrument the right way without spitting on everybody else. I mean, that's differentiation right there. But yet, when they needed the definition of that word, did they come to us? No. Because society has beat us down and said, you don't know anything about anything outside of the arts classroom.
Good point. Hey, Jonathan, before we go to the next person, I wasn't being rude to you when you were talking. My mouth was moving. I was trying to get my youngest daughter to bring me something. So just wanted to clarify that for you.
No, don't worry about that at all. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I had. So who wants to go next?
I'll hop in. I mean, it's so good. This is getting me fired up. I mean, I'm getting, you know what I mean? I'm getting excited here.
You're getting emotional.
I am getting emotional because, you know, we're all passionate about this, and we know the value because we've lived it, and we just keep screaming it from the rooftops, you know. And one of the best quotes, the late great Sir Ken Robinson, you know, said the arts aren't important just because they improve math scores. They're important because they speak to parts of children's being which are otherwise untouched. And you know, our focus, our laser-like focus on what's measured, you know? I mean, what's the Einstein quote? You know, not everything that's counted counts. You know, it's this concept of measurable. I mean, that's what a SMART goal is, right? M is for measurable. And I went to my principal once because we had our SLO kind of talk, and it was like, this year's SLO for the school is to raise math scores by 1 grade level. And I went up to him, I said, I don't want that as my goal. And he said, why not? I said, it's not against math. Math, literacy is all important, but it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not sufficient. And he said, well, what do you want your goal to be? I said, empathy. He looked at me, he's like, why empathy? I said, have you seen the kids in the hallway? They'll walk over each other if someone drops something. I said, we need to improve the compassion and so on. He's like, well, how would you teach it? I said, salvation is created. He looked at me, I don't know what you're talking about. So then I said, Pavel Chesnikov. He's like, I'm drawing a blank here. I said, look, Russian composer, right? Wrote some of the most beautiful music you'd ever heard, but he wrote salvation is created and then was told by his government, you can't write for the church anymore, you must write for the government. And that was the last sacred piece of music he wrote. And he goes, I don't get, how does that teach empathy? I said, because he never heard it performed. Can you imagine writing something that glorious and never hearing it performed? I said, for one moment, I want those students to stand in Pavel Chesnikov's shoes and to really understand the idea of what empathy is. And of course, without batting an eye, he looked at me, he said, how are you going to score it? And I'm like, well, look, we'll do a rubric. We'll set up a thing with outward empathy is compassion. We'll look at their compassion. We'll see how that's affecting them and affecting the kids. And it's this idea we have to put everything to a number and that it has to be measurable. And we have to get beyond that. We have to get past that because, boy, you know, some things you can't measure, like, you know, the ability to read faces, not just a book, right? The ability to walk into a room and understand, you know, when it's time to talk and when it's not. I mean, all these are the things that all of us are struggling with right now. It's kids not being able to do transitions, you know, kids not knowing what it's like to take turns and to compromise and to do all these things, you know, curiosity. I mean, for goodness sakes, these are the important things that the arts teach and that we have to lift up.
It's EQ versus IQ. You know, we can have all these kids that get caught up and know all these things, but if they're not able to interact with each other, if they can't share, take turns, listen, how will they make it? How will they be the next CEOs, the next astronauts, the next whoever? The next president even, you never know. So how are they going to be able to build those skills that they need to be world leaders if they don't have that background and just being able to interact with each other and to explore who they really are and how they can express themselves.
James, I saw you get excited when Chris mentioned the name of the Russian composer.
I also taught middle school band, so that's just a great piece. Just wow. I mean, I think that's just it. There's a part to the arts. It speaks to our humanity. It speaks to our spirituality. It speaks to so many things that you can't measure, but what you can measure is attendance. And if kids come to school for our classes, that's measurable. And I totally agree. And talking about what we're growing them and building them to be leaders. I emphasize confidence, professionalism, more on top of just, standing up on stage or sitting on stage and performing. That's the kind of skill set that you need just about anywhere you're going to be successful. And so I wish there were, I'm like Phil, I wish there were places to put data for that, but it's so important, and unless we can embrace that and figure out how to make that relevant, I think we're selling ourselves and selling our education short in this country and worldwide.
Good point. Last but not least, Pilar.
Oh, I've just been really thinking about the first thing you said. That's the core of my teaching. That's what I develop curriculum around, is higher level thinking and teaching students to use creative thinking skills to get from where they are to where they want to be. And I think part of it is, I remember my students don't have elementary school art. Some of them get middle school art, but it's not required. And so my Art 1 students, their idea of what art is just totally comes from society and family and whatever culture they're a part of. And so bringing them in, and there is such a learning curve for them to understand what this class really is about. And that, yes, we're going to learn how to do art, but we're also going to learn to be more creative and innovative thinkers. And even the students who are very artistic, they've been drawing every day since they could hold a pencil. You have those kids who come into Art 1 class, and then you have the kids who are like, I can't draw, I'm not creative. And when you require them to do a certain level of planning and brainstorming, and then have them push it a little bit further, and you can't just use your first idea, I want to see 10 ideas, and then we'll go from there. And the frustration level for both types of students is very interesting. They are not used to having to sit down and plan something out, do some revisions, discussion, communication, being able to not just show me, but to tell me about what you're doing. And at the end, well, what have you learned this semester? I learned how to plan art. And so I think really it's about making people aware of what really goes on in the classroom, I think would be helpful. But a lot of that just has to come down to we as art teachers sharing what we do in the classroom to change that paradigm.
I think you asked at the very beginning about Baltimore and my school, Gerald. And in my school is this big industrial building that's really dry, really, like when I first came into it, cinder block walls painted off-white, and just a really ugly building, quite frankly, inside. Well, now it's all wrapped up in art. It's all the work of my kids, and there's murals everywhere. I never asked for permission because they want us to. I'm like, I'm not gonna wait 3 months to make a mural. They can come and take it down later. And there's framed work everywhere. And now the kids demand to have their art up on the walls, and they take care of it. And if something falls down, they bring it to me, we put it back up. And with that said, the advocacy comes out of the art room. And somebody mentioned professionalism, like that we teach. James, talking about how do you teach the kids to be on stage? I guess that's what you do. But I take my kids out of the classroom and we show the work in other venues. And so before I go and pick them up from their houses in my minivan, because I got a minivan so I could carry my students around, not because I needed it for my family. I tell them what to wear. I tell them how to greet people. I tell them how to look at people in the eyes, what to tell them when they're there, how to shake their hands. And we practice. And they become their best advocates. And they talk about themselves and their work. And Pilar, you talked about what you teach in high school. I'm like, man, I don't teach high order thinking. I just teach them about who they are. I just try to unlock who they are as people and have it written down first on paper, and then being able to say it and then able to make it. And I think that's really important. So they learn about themselves.
And so much of what you do as educators is teaching them to learn about themselves. And there are multiple selves, because in elementary school, you're one self, in middle school, you're another self, in high school, and then as you grow up, you'll be a different self. Pilar, I think about you putting what you do in the frame of organizational skills and teaching people how to organize and manage. That's a skill that no matter what you major in, if you decide to go to college or if you decide to open a business, no matter what you do, that's important. We don't think about that through the lens. James, you talk about the importance of presentation, poise. It's not easy, particularly if you're shy or insecure, having to go on stage and be. And that breaks a lot of people, or will break a lot of people out of habits saying, wow, I can actually do this and I'm actually good at it. We forget about the poise and the promise that comes from that. Sia, when you talked about not only your international experience, but coming to the realization from a cultural standpoint that we in the United States really don't appreciate the arts in the way you, for example, did in Greece or other parts of the world, the 20 plus countries that you've visited. We see it as an accessory. We don't see it as a necessity. And so you put that in really good context. Brian, I want to thank you for talking about what you can't say in the kind of work you do now where you work, but that this is really a calling and that your articulation of the arts and what you do is really your communication with God. And it really puts into context vocation and avocation, something that we often don't see in many disciplines, but we can definitely see it in the arts. Sheena, I think you've actually changed someone's job description. I'm going to talk to you actually in January. What you said was so powerful. If the people in power don't appreciate the arts, how will anyone else? That is so true. I was turned on to at least classical music in college. I only had art twice in school, elementary school and high school. That was it. But it was a teacher at my community college who made us go to a classical, actually it was a symphony in Los Angeles. I didn't want to go because as that time 18-year-old, I thought it was white music. This can't relate to me. And going and being there and listening and closing my eyes and being taken to another place and then realizing how important that was in terms of being able to have conversations across gender lines of class and socioeconomic status. So I may follow with you because someone literally in January now is going to have another part of the job description. Erin, you bringing up the importance of data and the whole idea of management or of measurement, sometimes measuring to the point of madness. And that if we're going to measure, we have to try to figure out what that looks like, but there are more important things about that. And so you put that in context. And then Chris, you're talking about empathy and EQ, which is what Erin also brought up. There's an interesting way of looking at how Russian composers and Russian writers, whether it's literature or poems, having grown up in very, very different circumstances with us, how from some of the wretchedness of what they live, how they gave us wisdom. And the fact that you're able to push back and say, yeah, that sounds good, but here's how I want to measure. That's a really good point. Jonathan, you not only talking about students who inspire you. But when we talked about the touchy-feely and the feelings, you said, yeah, feelings. It's true, because we are people who are feelings. There's a whole debate, left brain, right brain. But one thing you bring up is something we often don't say in sports. We call sports, people who are sports, fans. That's short for fanatic. And they're there because they show feelings. And yet somehow when we talk about the arts, it's very different than we do in sports. So thank you for bringing it up. Feel really good in terms of laying out when you have a measurement to show me this, let me know. But also showing that why are you not going to wait for us to do that? You basically articulated what you're doing for your students and for yourself and for your colleagues on how to make this work. And then Toney, you put into this the whole context of, I don't just teach the arts or music. You teach literature, history, logic. You're teaching linguistics. You're teaching holistically, because we are ubiquitous people. We're just not one dimensional. And if there's something the arts can do, that's pretty helpful. I was excited about this conversation for a couple of reasons. One of my best teachers in school was an art teacher. And for the last several years, I've donated money to a high school in Los Angeles, in Inglewood, St. Mary's High School, which is a part of her Catholic order. And every year I donate money to fund a scholarship for 2 art students who are in high school, because I know what her work did for me. And then secondly, this is what I was looking over. My wife and I will tell you, we have no artistic ability that we know of. I can play the tabletop and I can't sing, but that's about it. But our youngest daughter during the pandemic created this. So she was 9 at the time. She created this to show the mask, but then once we're out, she'll smile and have this. And so she is the artistic daughter in ways that are very interesting. So I wanted to share that with you. And so with that, we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank each one of you for opening up your hearts, minds, and your wisdom to the conversation about the arts and the teaching of the arts across the board: voice, instrument, theater, all the different types that we have. And thank you for that. And always remember one thing: when we talk about ourselves as human beings, we often talk about ourselves just as that, a human being, as if it's a subject. But through the arts, what we really are talking about are humans. Being, it's the action. And it's through the arts that we are humans being. And with that, thank you for your time and look forward to another conversation in the future. Take care.